important to note that is that when the community started practicing polygyny, most of the women were initially opposed to it, but as time went on and men continued to persist at doing it because they thought it was necessary, they began to accept it and then began to see the benefits of it. So what motivated women to want to bring a sister wife into their family? The overriding factor that motivated women was that they wanted to provide a family for a sister because they thought it was the right thing to do. They were also impressed by how polygyny was practiced in their communities. Women generally thought that polygyny was a way to deter husbands from having extramarital affairs, and because they thought that it was being done primarily in the African American community in general, that they felt that they wanted to do it. If they were going to do it, they may as well do it right. A few sisters saw it as a way to have a sister that they had never had, and then also a few also did not want to be the only wife and wanted someone to help share the responsibilities, and because they thought that it would give them more time for themselves. But generally, it was about helping the sisters in need and making sure that sisters had a chance to be a part of a family, to be married and be a part of a family. One woman said, "I had been trying to get him to marry her for years because she thought she was a good sister," and I heard this echoed in other communities too, that they saw other sisters in the community that they thought were good sisters, and they wanted to invite them into their families. The ways in which they entered into polygyny was that a husband and a wife might approach a priest, and then the priest approach an potentially incoming wife. A husband might approach a potential wife. Wives invited women into their communities, into their families. And interestingly, wives pick out other wives for their husbands. And some of the women talked about how they would see a sister and she might have a certain attributes or certain characteristics or a certain skill set, and they thought it would be good to bring her into the family because they thought that it would help benefit their family. Overall, all of the communities said that women have to transcend conventional conditioning, and they had to be secure within themselves. Oh God, what have I done? Okay, so of course there's the real and there's the ideal, and so there's the ideal about being in polygyny. Then once you get into it, then there are issues that might arise. So one of the things that, particularly early on in the communities, one of the things that women were concerned about were they didn't want to feel like the already existing wife thought they were trying to take their husbands. And so, of course, there's just a lot of things that the incoming wife might experience, and then things that the already existing wife might experience. For the incoming wife also was the shock of realizing that they were with somebody else's husband. Some of them did not feel like they were really a wife. There was also confusion about how to present themselves to the public because they were saying they were married, but then when it came to filling out applications and legal forms, they were saying they were single. This was particularly the issue for a couple of those women who were mothers who felt like, even though they felt like they were married, they were perceived by the broader community as being a single mother. Some also talked about feeling isolated from the outside world, feeling like they were off on an island. Some of them also felt uncomfortable about how they're perceived by the outside world. So, for example, women in polygyny are thought to be dumb or to be stupid, and that men are taking advantage of them, that they're not getting any benefits from it. And so this was area of concern for women who were married in polygyny. And another issue it was that when they come into an already established family, feeling like they were kind of like an outsider. And this is the thing that you will find in blended families, step families, multiple fertility families, because when you come into a situation that's already where the people are already bonded, then it's going to, you feel like an outsider, and it takes time to get acclimated and get incorporated into the family so that you feel like an insider. So adjusting to different personalities was also an issue, of course. If you were single and you didn't have to have all these personalities, now you're married into a family with wives and a husband and children, and so now making those kinds of adjustments. So how do the women make the adjustments? They did still feel loved by their husband. They knew it was common in the African American communities, but they were not used to it being done openly and honestly and in the same household. And some of them talked about how they were accepting some aspects of the societies that they were a part of or the communities that they had joined, and was only accepting those things that they liked or wanted, but was not accepting the things that they did not like or did not want. And so they just had to pray for the right mind to be able to do whatever they needed to do. Jealousy. So when does jealousy arise, and how do women deal with it? Jealousy really probably more or less had a lot to do with the relationship between the wives. And of course, the relationships vary from sisterly love to estrangement to distant. And factors contributing to jealousy has to do with how the husbands treat the prospective wives. So, for example, if the husband's being unjust and treating one wife better than he's treating the other one, of course that's going to create jealousy between the women. And so, if that's happening, one woman might start to blame the sister versus blaming the husband, and then start acting cold towards her, and then the sister starts feeling hurt because now she's acting cold towards her. So it's just, interesting kinds of dynamics. And then the other thing that makes jealousy arise is feeling like his first wife is really his wife. And so you come in, you don't really feel like a wife, particularly if you haven't gotten married legally. And so that can make women feel jealous. When husbands are in the room, of course, with the other wife, then of course jealousy arises there. But interestingly, early on in the communities, when they first started practicing polygyny, some of the first women talked about how earlier on they were concerned, they would get jealous when he was in the room, but then as time went on, they couldn't wait till he got out of the room so that they could have time for themselves. And then when a new wife comes into the family, of course, insecurities can arise and then make you feel jealous, because women might begin to feel like, well, maybe what am I lacking, and what does he see so special about her? All these kind of things that women go through. I also found that there were different types of jealousy. So it's not necessarily jealousy over the husband, but we know that women a lot of times are jealous of each other for various reasons. And then also some of it had to do with the children. And some children begin to feel more connected to their sister wives. For example, in one family I interviewed the women, and she said her child really started to think that the sister wife was his mother. And she was like, what's wrong with this child? But as time went on, she began to see the benefits of got over it, because she began to see the benefits because she had someone who really cared about her child. So in terms of the women, I meant to say that because when people are just going to feel naturally connected to other people, and so of course then that creates clique, and so you might feel like you're an outside to women who are more connected and who are more bonded. So of course that creates jealousy. And back to the children. Sometimes jealousy arises because children have other extended family members, and some family members might have more means, and so they give their children more. And so now if you're a sister wife who your children are not getting as much, then that can create jealousy too. So, but how do women overcome jealousy? Generally, they said that they just need to put themselves in each other's shoes. As one woman said, oh, just grow up. So you're having all these thoughts, you're feeling all these feelings, and then when you really think about it, and if you're really on the spiritual path, what a lot of the sisters said they were on, and of course they were a part of spiritual religious communities, that was the goal. Then you just say, oh, just grow up and move on. Not being selfish was important, and recognizing that there was nothing wrong with them or that they're not lacking anything. Another reason, a way in which they overcome jealousy, is not discussing their relationship with their husband, with their sister wife, because what happens is when you do that, then one sister wife might feel like, oh, he gave her this, but he didn't give this to me, or he did this for her, but he didn't do this for me. And they said that it's important to understand that what your needs might be different than the other wife's needs. So what she gets might not necessarily be what you need to make you happy, or what he does for her might not necessarily be what you need to make you happy. So you have to understand that and just kind of let all that stuff go. One of the things they talked about was being compassionate towards each other. And so, for example, one says, they talked about saying things like, hey, honey, so-and-so looks kind of down today. Why don't you go and spend time with her? So in each community, women have their own alone time with their husband. And so you might give up some of your alone time that day just because because it looks like she needs somebody. She might need more love and support. And men also need to understand the importance of being fair and just, But no matter what, even if a family is having issues, if they have a schedule, then the schedule helps to keep everybody on point. Women being open and honest and trusting and talking to each other was very, very important. And they talked about how it was important to remember that you have to want for your sister what you want for yourself. So areas of conflict, of course, in all families there are going to be areas of conflict, whether it's monogamous, polygamous, but household cleaning was one of the main issues in these families, because of course individuals have different values with regard to that, and different ways of being, and different ideals about with regard to what's clean and what's not clean, and what's organized and what's not organized. Of course, being on opposite ends of the pole, where if you're very clean, extremely neat and clean and organized, versus somebody who's not extremely clean and organized, people have different ideals in terms of how much, when to clean and things like that, and how much to clean and organize. And so, of course, you're going to have issues around that. But again, that goes for any family or any people who are trying to coexist together. Another area of conflict was around children. So people have different parenting styles and different goals for their children. And of course, there's just a number of things that can come up as it regards to living together that people are going to conflict around because people are just different. So in terms of how they resolve conflict, all these communities were spiritual, religious communities, and so some of them used the oracles. One of the communities used the oracles, where the other ones used consultation from a priest or priestess. And so they used the oracles, or use consultation, spiritual consultation, to help them transcend their emotions. Family meetings were also important, not letting things build up, and taking care of issues right away, not letting them, go on and on, where people start to have negative thought and simmering over things, and of course things building up. Communication and being open, which means being open and honest, and doing so with the right person, because you know how in some families, you're upset with somebody and then you go talk about it with another family member versus addressing the issue to the person that you're upset with. And understand that everybody has their own personality, everybody has their own spirit, everybody does things different. Being open-minded and open to change, but ultimately striving towards oneness was how they resolve conflict. And as they said, it's not what you want or what I want or what he wants or what she wants, but what does God want? Economics, in the one community, they had cooperative economics, particularly one that was abroad, and then they also had some communities here in the United States, but they had cooperative economics. And in some of the other, one of the other communities, they also had cooperative economics, depending on their particular community. But in all the community, but in those particular communities, they said money is insufficient. So that's what seemed to be the greatest challenge to being in a polygyny, followed by the lack of autonomy and being able to make decisions about how money is spent. Because when you're single, you don't have anybody to answer to, so you can make your decisions about how you're going to spend your money. But when you get married, then now it's two people, and so you have to consider that other person. And if you come into a family where there's multiple wives and a husband, now you have more adults that's going to be involved in making decisions about how money is going to be spent. But most of the families pool their resources, and then each person had their own personal money. A couple of the wives did talk about, in one of the communities, did talk about how their financial status decreased once they married into polygyny. Their spiritual life increased because now they had a family business. They were able to have a community where people could come take classes for free. And so they began to see that it was not just about personal gain, but it was also about spiritual development and spiritual gain. So we had different situations in one community, in one community, in particular those communities. Let me just point out here that if in one community, particularly the Muslim community, a lot of the wives did not necessarily agree to polygyny, and so if the people are not on the same page and the wife did not consent to the husband bringing in another wife, then of course that's going to create a great deal of conflict. And in two of the communities, the women lived in the same house, but in the other communities, a couple of the two Muslim communities that were interviewed, the wives did not live in the same house, so of course that's going to affect how they affect the economics. And if the wives are not on the same page, then of course you're not pooling your resources. And in fact, in those situations, polygyny might be more of a feel the women who are in Muslim communities, polygyny pretty much they felt like it took away from their families, and that's because they were not on the same page. But in one community that was not necessarily the cooperative community, generally speaking, although the communities had cooperative arrangements in their particular communities. But in one situation, one wife was a homemaker and the other wife worked part-time while the husband held down 2 part-time jobs. In another situation, the 2 wives ran a family-owned business. One was a principal at a school and the husband worked outside of the household. And then another situation, the husband ran a business and both of the wives were employed. So there was a lot of flexibility with regard to that. Legalities, concerns were around their legal status as a wife, property, insurance, and taxes. A major issue for the communities had to do with health insurance, particularly the ones that were not cooperative. So if the husband is the only one employed, then only one wife could be put on his insurance policy, and of course that would be historically that would be the wife that held the legal license. But now you have some cities that accept domestic partnerships, so I guess it depends on the state and the city. And of course now we also have Obamacare, and so people can get health insurance without having to worry about being put on somebody's health insurance policy. Only the husband and the legal wife can file their taxes together, so that's another concern for women. And women struggle psychologically with whether or not they are a wife because they're not legally married. And this is exacerbated when you have to deal with the issues that deal with legality. So particularly when they had to deal with these issues, this is when the wife who did not have the legal license would feel, have concerns or feel like she's not a wife or like she was an outsider. Also, new wives coming in was concerned about their stake in the property, but in one of the communities, what they use, and I'm sure if for the cooperative community, if they were situated in the United States, what they did was they used contracts, wills, tenants of common for property ownership, and then you can use corporations and you can have limited partnerships. So there's all kinds of legal instruments to get around some of the legalities. I think one of the most important issues is if you're a wife who was a homemaker and you are relying on your husband's Social Security, then I think that might be the main issue for a woman who's not employed and who's not building her own Social Security or have some kind of alternative for old age insurance. And so I'm thinking that could probably be a real major issue for a wife whose husband worked and she didn't work and who doesn't have her own Social Security, because now only the legal wife will be able to benefit from his Social Security. So in those situations, it's important that you have a plan for old age. The benefits of having sister wives. Women talked about a number of benefits to being in a polygynous family, but overall the biggest benefit that they talked about was child care. One woman said that when she was a single parent, she had to take her daughter with her everywhere, but once she married into polygyny, she no longer had to worry about that. She could leave her child with her family and not worry about it. But generally speaking, all the women talked about how, particularly those in which the women were on the same page and they were living in the same household, talked about how significant it was to be able to have somebody that they really trusted and that they knew loved their children and that they knew how they treated their children, and that they knew that they could count on them to take care of their children when they were not there without having to worry about it. They also spoke of spiritual growth and development, because of course if you're in a situation like that, then of course it's going to it has to pull the very best out of you or the worst out of you. But if you're striving towards spiritual development, then of course it means that you are having to constantly rise above all your conditioning and your thinking and things like that in order for your spiritual growth and development. Having help running the household, they said they didn't have to do everything by themselves. That was important, and that was another benefit. They thought it was also beneficial for children to be able to be around a lot of people because it helped them to grow. Also having someone to help with husband care, which is what I was calling it, someone to assist with their husband's needs. As one woman said, not just one woman, but several of them talked about having their children, having to pull on them all day, all the time, and then at night you have someone else pulling on you. So I guess having a sister wife gave you some reprieve in that regard. And then autonomy, they felt like they had more freedom and not to have to worry about things because they have someone else that was helping them do some of the various things that needed to be done and meeting the demands of a husband and children. And then for single women, it was really nice to be able to, if you didn't have children, to marry into a polygynous family. So now you have the joy of children. And then, of course, companionship. Not only do you have companionship from the husband, but you also have companionship from sister wives. Sisters in all the communities said it has to be God-centered. God has to be at the center. And that it's important to want for your sister what you want for yourself.